Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Bill Farrell and I'll be moderating this week's show. Well, folks, most of us have a belief that our congressional representatives must use all campaign donations for just that, the campaign. The use of donations must be fully disclosed and cannot under any circumstances be used for personal needs, agendas, or what I'll call non-campaign stuff. However, what most of us are unaware of is this. Congress has established what is known as leadership PACs. These PACs are not technically campaign funds, but rather a separate fund with very minimal regulation. Funds that can literally be used for just about anything that a representative desires. Many of these things are far from what we would call campaign needs. This morning we will be discussing these leadership PACs and the morals and ethics surrounding them. We will endeavor to look at how these funds are impacting our representatives today and whether there should be laws that are enacted to regulate their use. And we'll also try to find some positives as to why these leadership PACs are of benefit. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest panelists this morning. Jim Leach, who is a former congressperson for us and also at the U of I Center for Human Rights. Adriana Stoyan, I'm close, I think, professor of political science from Mount Mercy University, and Steve Sauverne, who's a mediator in the area. So I guess let's start talking about these leadership PACs. And are they really an issue that we should be concerned about?
Absolutely, and in your introduction, I can't conceive that there's anything good about them. So let me tell you where I could begin on that score. No, they're preposterous. They're put in place for a number of very partisan reasons. One is that chairmen of committees and subcommittees are asked to have leadership PACs, and then the money that comes in, they're to dole out part to the political party that they belong to, and they're required to raise a certain amount or they don't get to keep their jobs. I think I'm the last chairman that refused of a committee of the United States Congress. And the issue isn't so much, although it is an issue, of what it does in the conflicts for themselves. Mm-hmm. It's what it does in conflicts for public policy. Because what happens if you're on, let's say, the Armed Services Committee, the people who give the leadership PACs are those that are armed forces contractors. If you're on the Banking Committee, they're financial institutions. On the Agricultural Committee, they're agribusinesses. And it's a myth to think people give out of happiness. They give for a purpose, and the purpose is to influence legislation. And so those that give make it very clear that they want to set the agenda, they want certain things they want done, and they have certain things they don't want done, and both of which are very important to public policy. These things should be abolished.
Right. Now, just to, I guess, be devil's advocate just a little bit, though, we want to have an avenue so that there can be large donations that are made, and I think it's realistic to think that those are going to see influences from all different angles.
Well, that doesn't work. I mean, let me just say, what group of poor people give money to influence things in their concern? People give money very precisely to the groups that most influence them and are most beneficial to them. There is no case for giving large money to anybody in the American political system, and is the weakness of American politics today.
Right. Adriana, what kind of angle are you thinking here?
Are you assigning me to the devil's advocate?
You could, whichever direction you'd like to go.
I mean, I'm taking a different look at this, and I think from the perspective of a comparative politics person, the leadership pacts sort of fulfill a function that in other democracies usually it's fulfilled by the government. So in a number of other European governments, funding campaigns is a taxpayer's job, as in taxpayers pay taxes, and out of the taxes, a certain amount of money is given to political leaders or parties to run their campaigns. The way public financing, campaign finance in the United States is structured is just not incentivized enough for political parties to use it. And so they have to pay people, and they have to pay for ads, and they have to do things. So you find another avenue of it. And there are a number of avenues. And it's true. I mean, there are basically no middle-class, ordinary people paying into the leadership PACs. Most of the time they get it from the industry, from lobby groups, and so on. But in the huge diversity of PACs, super PACs, and other kinds of donations that we have going on, I don't think that leadership PACs are necessarily the absolute worst of them. And the reason for that is that ultimately it becomes an avenue for representatives to strategize amongst themselves and hopefully in favor of the political party. And I mean, you know, I know the founding fathers hated political parties on that, but as a political scientist, we generally like political parties. And the reasons for that is that it makes a democracy go. So we want to have strong parties, and we want to have the elected representatives be strong so they can marshal the votes, so they can marshal the votes in the electorate and marshal the votes in Congress to get stuff passed,
right,
to get stuff done, to impose party discipline and so on. Ideally, leadership PACs should be doing that, should be marshaling the votes in Congress, should be coalescing people, should be creating those votes to pass things. Practically, that doesn't happen, or at least Democrats and Republicans use those funds differently.
Right.
And there are reasons for why that doesn't happen, but the structure in itself is not inherently corrupt. It's that it exists within a political structure that just creates chaos.
Right.
Where to start? Because I think one of the things I agree with you about is that leadership PACs may be a small part of this swamp of legal corruption. You're also right that we could take a lesson from European countries that provide public funding.
And well-structured public funding, not just a token. It exists,
Exactly.
And you don't really want to use it.
It's one of the reform kinds of things. But in specific with regard to leadership PACs, they are outrageous in their use and in their concept. They began as sort of funding your way to leadership. I was a candidate for Congress almost 35 years ago. I got a contribution from Jim Wright from Texas. And I thought, what a swell guy. And then somebody a little more privy to the process looked over their glasses at me. He wanted to be Speaker of the House. And that was the sole reason he had contributed to my meager campaign. That was the origin of this. And now people are really upset because their politicians are using it as a slush fund. I think it's awful. But frankly, I think it's probably less a problem than the structure of a leadership PAC that buys your way into influence. It's simply another way to accommodate all the money that wants to come in.
Right, right. So, go ahead.
Just one brief question. Let's say we get rid of the leadership PACs. We would not abolish buying your way into leadership or into the political hierarchy.
Probably not, simply because money will find another way.
Right. So am I correct?
It doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop the one process that's sanctified
Well, I think that's
to get there.
a really good point, though. I think the leadership PACs, from my understanding, developed from a result of congressional action to try to regulate the way that funds were being donated or put into campaigns at that time. Am I right in saying that?
No.
Okay.
Leadership PACs were introduced by people who wanted to advance their own personal causes and personal assets. And let me be very precise. Some leadership PACs have hired family members to run them and get paid salaries. When leadership PACs are used to fund certain expenses, whether they be travel, whatever it might be, that are personal, that one says they fit a public function, that's getting extra remuneration. And by the way, I've never heard anyone figure out a way to tax these added benefits that accrue to a public figure that uses these PACs in given types of ways. As far as the whole issue of that you've defended, Adriana, that I'm not going to accept, that if an individual raises a huge sum of money, and then from that sum of money, from special interest, that they have to respond to in a legislative way, that is setting an agenda for the special interest, accepting things that should be done or not done that the special interest wants done or not done. And then they use that money to give to candidates and fellow colleagues under the assumption that they then will get the votes to advance their careers within a legislative chamber. That is not a defensible activity. It's a reprehensible activity. And I see no ethical or public policy advantage to it.
So Adriana had mentioned, though, that, so let's say that we don't like leadership PACs. So what do we do? Is there another system that we can look at?
Well, who says something has to be done?
Yeah.
You're saying
Unnecessary.
the only thing that leadership PACs do is increase the number of conflicts of interest in the political process. Steve used an absolutely appropriate word when he said legal corruption. Technically, there is no such thing because it's either corrupt or it's illegal. But it is massive legal conflicts of interest that affect legislation, which means affects every citizen of the United States of America. And so do you want to have a Congress that is just exercised with conflicts of interest or not? Now, this is a small part of the conflict of interest aspect, but it is the most succinctly irresponsible and, in my view, completely and utterly indefensible aspect of the American political scene.
Go ahead.
And the only defense of it is the other guy has them, therefore we have to. The other party has them, therefore we have to. But that is not.
Let's let Adriana.
Please.
So just
Adriana, I don't mean to jump on you.
all right, so no, I mean, I understand what you're saying, the behavior that we observe from this leadership PACs, the incentives that they provide for behavior in Congress are what we like to call perverse. But hey, we are full of fun political scientists. We have all kinds of words. But the other side of it, I guess what my argument is that in itself is not the leadership PACs that are, they don't bring to the table any kind of new behavior that we have not seen in legislatures since ancient Greece. This ambition is supposed to check ambition, right? Is one of those very trite things that we always sort of say about politics, and that's what the system was built to do, ambition to check ambition. And so because ambition is part of politics and real politics all the time, and unfortunately ethics does fall victim to that. So in a way, I don't hate leadership PACs, or I don't blame them. I don't think that they create this kind of behavior. I think that behavior was always there, and this leadership PACs are always a product of that.
And you know what we've done with leadership PACs is give a tool to ambition.
Right.
And a tool to greed. I think there's one other aspect of a leadership PAC that in and of itself is much worse than anything we've seen historically or with other. It's this factor. People complain today that particularly the House of Representatives can't be led. They're having a real struggle in leadership, let's say in the House of Representatives. I think there's one very good reason. Because we're not just beholden to leadership, but we're, as members of Congress, beholden to the fellow or the gal that's swaggering down the aisle with pockets full of money. That they are provided with the wherewithal to advance the interests of any member and to contribute directly to their campaigns. And as a result of that, we have a membership that is less apt to respond to real leadership, more apt to respond to money.
And it's, in a way, it's a misnomer leadership PAC. It
Yeah,
actually,
it is.
it's more of a PAC than a leadership. But there's a really interesting research done on this, and it's because leadership PACs are new, the research on this is relatively new. And so, but there's really interesting in how the difference between rank and file using leadership PAC's money and the leadership of the House and the Senate using PAC money. And the difference is that the rank and file usually give money to like-minded representatives, and mostly the most ideologically extreme members of Congress get the most of the contributions to their leadership PACs. So they contribute to other ideologically extreme members, which leaves the actual leadership of the House and the Senate sort of with a conundrum because they can't completely swamp out this other base. So actually what the leadership in the Senate and the House do with their money is to buy off the moderate votes. So they end up giving the moderates more money so that the moderates vote with the extreme and the party semi-stays together in Congress, which is an interesting thing now with the government shutdown, where you saw the Republican moderates really not liking the idea of a government shutdown, but not really moving away. And part of it was they're not getting the donation to their own leadership PACs the way the Tea Party caucus gets. And they get compensated from the above the top leadership to stay with the party and keep it together.
I think it's fair to say that it's a really tough situation now. Right. In order to get elected, you need to have the money.
Right.
You need to be able to pay for the commercials.
Reality.
It's a reality of the situation. And if that money is coming from this particular source, I think the thought right now is so be it. But it's having a lot of unintended consequences where we're not necessarily seeing representatives that are acting in the best interest of their constituents. Would that be fair to say?
It is. Let me give an example. Let's pretend Steve is a congressman and he gets a $50 contribution from a constituent, and he gives a $5,000 contribution to his leadership PAC from a vested interest on a committee of jurisdiction that he's on. Who is Steve going to feel most indebted to, and who is he going to listen to on a vote before the committee of jurisdiction that he sits? The constituent probably has no idea of the issue before the committee. The person who gave the $5,000 sure does and sure cares. And so instead of Steve being indebted to the individual who voted for him, he is massively indebted to the individual who gave that to his PAC. And then, which is more important, money given to a campaign from Steve's perspective, or maybe money that he can take a vacation with? And
I love vacations.
you love vacations. See, Steve's kind of a vacation type. And so all I'm saying is you are having the first meeting I've ever heard on television of a discussion of this issue. I've never heard of it anywhere in the country on a format like this. This is out of sight, out of mind of the typical constituent. And it's incredibly important. And it relates to what Adriana said, the word ambition. And frankly, pleasure.
And you know, I think the good news in all of this is that because of the nature of the use of leadership PACs now, that it's going into slush funds and it's paying for big vacations, and it's, you know, Charlie Rangel did got a $65,000 painting of himself to hang in his chambers. These things I think people can relate to. And the good news about this is that the conversation about this was started by a conservative. It was picked up by 60 Minutes, and it's being talked about now. It's just like the insider trading stock deal of a few years back was brought up by this Schweizer. And the legislature did something about it. The Congress did something about it. I think there's a chance that maybe something can be done because conservatives, for some reason, and I'll tell you one of the reasons is the Tea Party talked about crony capitalism. This is what we're talking about. When I heard the Tea Party talk about crony capitalism, I say, you know, they've got something there. And so some of the conservative groups are responding to that. So I think that's the good news. Liberals have been talking about this for a long time, and conservatives opposed it, with the exception of present company. But now there's parity in PAC giving. It used to be that the Republicans got a lot more PAC money, Democrats didn't get it, so when Democrats squawked, it looked like a partisan thing. Now it's kind of parity of corruption, and I think both parties can go after it.
And in fairness, I think the reason why the issue, I mean, not fairness actually, and just to continue to be skeptical of human nature, I think that the reason why this is now an issue and is raised, especially on the conservative side, is because there is parity. And because there are a number of moderate leadership PACs that are now being formed in the idea of fighting off Tea Party candidates at the primary level, Karl Rove and so on, that is contributing to a number of moderate leadership PACs. So there is, again, ambition and some degree of self-interest.
So I think it's fair to say that the issue in general, leadership PACs, we would say that there's some bad stuff going on. There may be some goods that we can try to pull out of that, but we're talking about our representatives that we elect into office who are going to have to enact legislation to take the money away from themselves.
Right.
So how do we begin that process?
Well, the only way that one gets something passed that congressmen don't like is that there has to be a truly deep and widespread public outrage. And then the question becomes, can they vote against it? But I would say I know of no issue in politics, although it goes far beyond leadership PACs, that the right, the left, and the center ought to coalesce together to object to. And I would just add one other aspect to this. The special interests give often equally to both sides on committees of jurisdiction. That is, if you're in the Armed Services Committee, you don't give to anyone in the Ag Committee. You give to people in your committee, and it's an absolutely public interest. Forgetting the partisan Republican Democrat, it's what's in the public interest. How do you have an elected representative that exercises independent judgment if everybody on committee jurisdiction that person sits is indebted to the same groups? It is really a dilemma.
So I suspect, you know, let's say that we did enact legislation that just abolished leadership PACs.
That would be helpful. It's trivial in terms of the whole scene, but it'd be helpful.
Right.
But you're not likely to be able to pass constitutional tests without reversing some very serious Supreme Court precedents. Money, campaign contribution is free speech. Members of Congress have their own free speech. Leadership PACs are an expression of free speech.
There's a big challenge.
You're just saying they're legal because it's the law.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can change the law.
Right.
And there is,
it would take the Supreme Court reversing it.
No. You can change the law to abolish these things. That doesn't mean the Supreme Court might or might not intervene. That's a question that'd be opened. There's no part of the Citizens United that says anything about PACs.
It would certainly get it in the public eye if the law was enacted to make the change, even if it did need to go to the Supreme Court to make those changes. So, so what steps do we take? Is there thoughts that we can have? You know, maybe we can't. You know, if we abolish them, likely this money is still there.
Ask people running for office whether they'll have one or not.
Yeah. And I think the leadership PAC is a simple step. They can be abolished. Congress can do that. They have the capacity to do it. I don't think there's any restraint from doing it. They didn't exist 30 years ago or so, and they're sort of cobbled together to answer a particular interest at a time. There's no question, however, that there's an overriding elephant in the room, and that is Citizens United. There's no question but when the Supreme Court said number one, money is speech, and number two, corporations are people and can have free speech, that they threw a monkey wrench into the process of democracy. And I think, Jim, you alluded to it at the outset. This is a process issue that goes at the very heart of our democracy. It means that our government responds to money instead of individual citizens. I think it explains something like the disparity of wealth in the country. If money drives government, then money is going to be responded to, and this will just be geometric in its progression, unless the process itself is reversed. There are a number of things that can happen. Congressman Leach was a leader all the time he was in Congress. I think it was 30 years. You know, the response, it's a very difficult one. But I think that right now there may be, you know, one of those moments where we can at least attack the leadership PAC problem, and maybe people will be sensitized to the balance.
And I think that there is a bill introduced in the Senate recently to deal with, to at least make the leadership PACs not be able to use the money for personal expenses. So not abolish the leadership PACs, but take away the whole vacation. Which, you know, and I'm not sure how much of the total money raised by leadership PACs actually goes to, you know, extra fun stuff. But we definitely don't want that kind of...
But I think that's one of the problems is we don't know.
Right.
There's, you know, so little regulations about it. We really don't know where that money is spent.
And a lot has to do with the Senate and House Ethics Committee, which themselves could pass ethics rules that deal with these things to hold its own members accountable. So we don't necessarily have to do it by law. We can just do it in each chamber.
And the good news is in the House of Representatives, there are a handful of Republicans that have put forth a bill that will deal with the leadership PAC problem. Senate is a big challenge because Mitch McConnell has blocked any efforts toward campaign reform, and will probably block anything there as well.
And the Senate Ethics Committee doesn't even look at leadership PACs. So as far as the Senate Ethics Committee is concerned right now, it does not have jurisdiction over leadership PACs. It doesn't show up in their rules. The House might, although they've never actually overtly exercised it.
Let me mention one bipartisan dimension that is unruly. This is an absolutely extraordinary pro-incumbent rule. And it is designed to advantage all incumbents in the United States Congress.
Which is why.
And for that reason, it is very difficult to change, because where do incumbents want to write laws against their vested interest?
Right, yeah, I mean, you know, I think this issue is something where we really just need to start noticing what's going on. And it's something where, you know, having shows like this and a conversation about the issues, and then contacting our representatives to let them know how we feel and help create that public outcry that's going to really make a difference. Would that be something that would be a fair step to be thinking that we need to do, is contact our representatives?
Absolutely. I think anything like this, that's representative democracy. Just know who else is contacting them, with what other agenda.
Right.
And know how difficult it's going to be. But unless we address this particular problem, we can't address all of the other problems that face this nation.
And with that note, we're going to have to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you very much for being here. It's been an excellent show.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Adriana. Steve?